2025 Political Studies Keith Gottschalk lecture on African integration. And I think this includes our online audience. We welcome them. It is an honor, of course, to be your program director in this afternoon. My name is Ayanda Nombila, and I'm from the Political Studies Department here at the University of the Western Cape, EMS. So this event marks the fourth annual public lecture on African integration in honor of Prof. Keith Gottschalk. Now, as a way of proceeding or beginning, I would like to invite Professor Monwabisi Kgalagala, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, academic, to open this event and welcome you. And just to note that after this welcome that he will do, he will have to be excused because he has other commitments. So, Prof. Kgalagala, please.
Colleagues, good morning. I'm just worried, am I audible enough? 1, 2, 1, 2, is it fine now? All right, thank you very much. Our program director, Professor Nombila, Mr. Nombila, I wanted you to respond like that. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and esteemed panelists, good morning. I carry warm greetings from the office of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Robert Balfour, who could not join us this morning because of other engagements. Professor Balfour is aware that we are all gathered here this morning, and he has asked me to really convey his best wishes for a successful lecture. So take that into account as we engage further this morning. Equally, in my capacity as the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, I wish to welcome you and convey my warmest greetings to all of you in the room, but I'm also told that there are colleagues who are joining in online, and I also wish to express my thanks for them to take the time to be part of this very important lecture. So we are honored this morning because we have Professor Zondi, who is always around. I tend to see him on our big screens, making very important observations about issues which are very critical in our times. So, Prof, you are acknowledged, and thank you very much for coming through this morning. It is also fitting that we also have, Professor Keith Gottschalk, and of course, in whose name this lecture was established. Prof, I remember this face as I was a student here in the 90s. I think it was 92, 93. So he was still kicking. And I believe he's still kicking. So we honor you and we welcome you. This is very important for us. And of course, there's this reminder as I was going through the notes that you remain an active contributor to the intellectual life of this university since those olden days I can recall. So thanks for sharing us, your food for thought all the way up to this day. And I also want to acknowledge our Dean, Prof. Esso, Michelle Esso, our Dean Economic Management Sciences. Prof. We also acknowledge you as the leader of the faculty. And of course, Ms. Diana Yach, who I believe serves as the chairperson of the Marbega Foundation Fund. She's not with us this morning, but I think she deserves to be acknowledged because this is important as the resource for this event, and of course, a related award which has been mentioned is coming from that fund as well, so we acknowledge her. The support offered by the department has not gone unnoticed. I'm not sure, Prof, you wouldn't be able to drive this by yourself. The department is fully behind this. That is the political science department. We used to call it the political science. I don't know what happened around so that the name was changed. Okay. Yeah, so it used to be political science. Yeah, but I think there must have been very good motivation for that particular change to happen. So, of course, top of my list is Prof. Africa and those who have worked behind the scenes to see to it that this event is a success. We always tend to forget about the people who work behind the scenes. And of course, you, the leader, we acknowledge you for making it happen like this. Thank you very much. I'm also pleased to see colleagues from the university, not necessarily from the department. I was just in conversation with one of the senior members from science. And I asked her, what are you doing here? He said, well, I have an interest. So we're very happy to see people from other parts of the university also honoring and gracing this event with their presence. I'm sure that what gives us a bigger weight to see, people who have an interest, a very good mix, sharing their perspectives as part of the debate. So we welcome you, of course. And about the lecture itself, from my reading and my following of these events, the lecture series honors Prof. Keith, of course, whose scholarship and public engagement have influenced both South African politics and the study of political life. I think we all know that. With the support, of course, of the Marbega Foundation Fund, it was established to give us a platform so that we could debate issues related to African integration across politics, society, and the economy. Now, the award, that is the African Integration Award, draws attention to the kind of research we value most as UWC, work which is engaged with society, critical in its approach, and of course relevant to real-world problems. So the theme of this year's lecture, advise the role of multilateral banks in African integration and amid G20 is quite significant, I believe. Now, development banks, whether they are continental, whether they are global, provide resources and policy frameworks that influence Africa's economic direction. We all know that. But they also raise concerns about, dependency and decision-making power. As South Africa takes its seat in the G20 alongside the African Union, the central question perhaps that we need to pose is how do we secure integration that aligns with Africa's priorities rather than external interest? As I close, a university like ours shows its value when it enters real debates, and I'm confident that today's lecture will do exactly that. Now, this lecture should connect lecture room ideas with policy choices, for example, and political struggles that influence Africa's future. For students, this is a classic example of theory connecting practice. I'm sure you will take some lessons from this lecture. Now, for staff, it is a reminder that research is about understanding but also about informing outcomes. Now, the Department of Political Studies has long worked in this way, keeping the scholarship connected to society. By being here, whether you're a student, whether you're a member of staff or a member of the wider community within UWC, you are really demonstrating that Africa's future cannot be left to the others. My hope, of course, is that our discussion here today will encourage us to think about what is possible, what is doable, but more importantly, what is necessary for Africa. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry, I'm going to disappear.
Thank you very much, Flo Khala. I appreciate your time. And so, of course, it would be an incomplete event if our own Professor Michelle Essa, our Dean of Faculty of EMS, did not also welcome you. Prof, thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you to our program director. Our DVC has made my role slightly easier because he's mentioned everybody that needs to be mentioned, and so I can basically say all protocols observed. But I do want to share a little anecdote, because as I put thoughts down on paper, I just did a Google search on our honorable Professor Keith Gottschalk, in whose honor we meet this morning. And it reminded me of a time when I was a student of political science. I don't know when it changed from political science to studies. I do know it changed. But I was a student of political science, and I'm not going to tell you when, because then you're going to figure out my age. And at that time, we used to use the prefabs over on that side where Campus Protection Services is. And Professor Gottschalk, I mentioned this last year, I think, was my professor, was one of my professors. And one of the first things he mentioned when he welcomed us to his course was he talked about his participation in the struggle, his sacrifice, his prison time. And at that time, being about 19, I didn't fully comprehend the sacrifice. I didn't fully comprehend what it took and what it meant. But now I do. And so I am so privileged, Keith, to be able to open this lecture this morning in your honor. And it's such a privilege to be able to share some anecdote in terms of my relationship with you. Let me just find my place now. As is mentioned in the invitation, our faculty is serious about critical, engaged, and applied scholarship. We would not be true to our vision statement of aspiring, and I quote, to be a leading EMS faculty recognized for its excellence in relevant teaching, learning, research, community engagement, etc., close quotes, without engagements such as this one that's being hosted today. Indeed, we are just over 30 years into our democracy. But what this time period highlights, for me at least, are the challenges associated with transforming a society that has been plagued by oppression through colonialism and more recently apartheid. At the same time, this political system that people fought for, sacrificed their lives and family lives for, hasn't necessarily translated or resulted in equality for all. And we know this especially when we do a quick search on things like the Gini coefficient or issues around poverty, inequality, and unemployment, because we know that South Africa remains one of, if not, the most unequal society in the world. Equality, as we all know, is not only about political freedom and the right to vote. It's about so much more. We've just come out of August, a month that our faculty dedicates to the women of 1956. And while we celebrate and remember these women for their resilience, their self-sacrifice, and their love for humanity, there are still so many women and children and others from vulnerable groups who are caught in bondage. The bondage of violence, poverty, oppression in the workplace, sexual harassment, and I could go on and on. But my intention is not to discourage you. It's to highlight that there's still so much to be done. And it starts with engagements such as these. Engagements that illuminate the issues affecting and influencing our African reality. Engagements that awaken in us the volition to find practical and meaningful remedies, and our DVC referred to that just moments ago, that are contextual and acknowledge that as people from the African continent, we have the remedies deep within us. We just need to take a moment to reflect, to consider, to deliberate, and to engage. We don't need to travel thousands of miles and spend lots of money and other resources to visit countries in the north, not that their experiences don't matter. But Afrocentric solutions can be found right here. This is the continent of Africa, isn't it? But yet we travel and we look to the West to find solutions that will suit our contexts and to problems that are experienced by our people and by ourselves. And so I'm sure that this lecture on the role of multilateral development banks, which is hosted today in celebration of the work by Professor Gottschalk on African integration, will confirm that we have the answers right here, in our minds and in our hearts. So may God bless you, and may God continue to bless the work of our hearts, our minds, and our hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Esau. So the chairperson of the Maubega Foundation Fund, Ms. Diana Yak, is not able to come to this lecture today. Circumstances beyond her control have dictated that she does not come. So otherwise, she sends an apology, and she's in full support of this event. As we already know that the foundation has set this fund for Professor Keith. Now, we're going to go straight to Professor Zondi, our keynote speaker. Prof. Zondi, of course, is a professor of politics and international relations at the University of Johannesburg. Prof. Zondi is the founding editor of the Journal of BRICS Studies and an editor-in-chief of both the African Journal of Political Science and the International Journal of African Renaissance Studies. He was the executive director of the Institute for Global Dialogue from 2009 to 2016. He heads the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation, as well as the UWI, and the Institute for Global African Affairs. I think that's all we have for him. I'm sure there is more, but please join me in welcoming Professor Zondi to take us into a wave of scholarship. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Program Director, and good morning to all of you. Are you well? I am very well. A special good morning to kids. Thank you so much for keeping us here and bringing us down here to have a meaningful conversation about the world that we would like to see. Our dear Dean, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Prof, for all the work that is being done here. We can see it from even at distance. Thank you for making time to be here, and of course the Deputy Vice Chancellor in absentia for his kind welcoming remarks. Thank you to the organizers from the great department, which is my second department in the country. We had a lovely conference here of the South African Association of Political Science, one of the best of many years, and I became the president of the association after that. So I have seen many conferences, but the one that was held here, right in this room, was among the best. Thank you so much for continuing to advance knowledge for social justice, knowledge for social upliftment. It's a great honor, and a great honor to all of you. And I see I have a mentor here, Hakim, and others who are here, mentees that are here that I work with in other areas. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Mine is to try and present some thoughts so that I can perhaps instigate you to offer some thoughts. And I'm going to do that on the basis that knowledge is power. But knowledge is power when it is acquired. And it is power when the knowledge that seeks to cause change, to build a better society, a better community, is engaged with. Not all knowledge is power to me, but knowledge is always power to someone. The knowledge I don't have is power to the one who has, and the knowledge I have can be power to me. An African proverb says, a snake you don't see is a danger to you. It's obvious. It is because the one you see, you walk around it. So to see is power. To see is to avoid the pitfalls of life. To see is to understand how to walk and get ahead. And to see is the same word as to know. The see is the same word as to acquire a knowledge. It is indeed true, as an ancient biblical proverb says, that people perish for lack of knowledge. It doesn't say they die, it simply says they perish. We diminish in relative to the knowledge we have. So if we know less and less about ourselves, less and less about what we could do to change our circumstances, overcome poverty, overcome inequality, overcome situations around us, if we know less and less about how we could contend with the powers that constrain us, things that limit us, if we know less and less about what we could do to build a better society, then we diminish to lesser beings than those who know more. And those who know more tend to grow stronger and better because they get to know what it is that they can do to do better. I think that's partly the reason why in 1956, 1957, Korea, what is South Korea today, and Ghana are at about the same level, facing the same conditions, but South Korea grows significantly and Ghana doesn't grow, it actually diminishes. It's relative to the knowledge. There are many conditions, including forces of imperialism that favored one side and disfavored another side, but there is a dynamic that relates to what Ghana knew about itself and why it did not know what it needed to know about itself. And perhaps the biggest effect of colonialism is to distort what we know about ourselves. It is to distort what we know about what we've been able to do, what we are capable of doing, and what we need to do. And therefore, overcoming economic apartheid, political apartheid, cultural apartheid, and all of those kinds of things is insignificant if it does not also lead to overcoming intellectual apartheid and intellectual colonialism. And unless we free ourselves in our mind, we will not be able to free ourselves in the minds of this world. And therefore, education is an absolutely necessary tool for freedom. But it has to do with what knowledge is being shared. Now, I say these things to preface what I want to say today. This conversation is triggered by the legacy of Kid and the work that he has been able to do on this campus, in this country, and frankly across the continent of Africa and beyond, in placing the interest of the margins, the interest of the disparate, the interest of the periphery, the interest of Africa at a center of the world knowledge, of world humanism, of world power. Now, it is kids joining a huge number of others who've been trying all along to fight an epistemic battle of freedom, an attempt to free our minds about what we need to know and what we need to unknow in order to move forward. For it is Catherine Odora Hoppers from Uganda who says, in order for us to relearn, we need to unlearn. There are certain things we need to unlearn, including these things that normalizes marginality, normalizes inequality, normalizes marginalization of Africa, marginalization of people of African descent, marginalization of the poor, and all of those kinds. Unlearn them in order that we can relearn the possibility that we can build a society where all of us prosper. Now, Kit has done a lot of work, and this is not really an intellectual biography to look at all that he has done, but all of those who care to know, his areas of work were very diverse. I encountered him for the first time reading a poem, and the poem, I was still at university at the time, and somebody reads a poem, and that's when we get to know. It was a poem given in some social justice meeting, I think in Johannesburg, where Jeremy Cronin was. They were together in that thing. So he uses poetry to speak political messages and to teach and to do that. Then I will later then look at his work that looks at rethinking of Pan-Africanism, tracing its roots and tracing its future. Then I'll get to look at the work that it does on domestic political economy in South Africa, especially the very cardinal work did on race and economics. It was challenging the idea that sought to distinguish between apartheid and economy, and to argue that apartheid and economy are not mutually inclusive in a South Africa of the time. And a lot of work that looked at the question of jobs, the question of industrialization, changing the economic production patterns of South Africa to make possible a future that we want to look at. So this lecture is actually a homage, an epistemic homage to the body of knowledge that I suggest Keith's work belongs to. So I'm not going to just talk about what Keith did, but talk about the subject that might be of interest as we take the baton forward. It is not an intellectual biography, as I said, or a memoir of any form, but it's a moment of reflection about what are the possibilities going forward. And it is also born out of a concern about the African story, and us telling our story, both about our difficulties and also our possibilities going forward. And also I say this because today, the questions related to economics and politics, questions related to development and life chances and quality of life, jobs, finance, have become prominent. All the more this year, now that South Africa and Africa are hosting the Group of 20 for the first time in 20 years, and it won't be coming to this way perhaps for another 20 years because it cycles. So we stand at a precipice of great things as South Africa hosting the 21 major economies in the world that are going to have a summit towards the end of November this year. As a result, there's lots of meetings taking place right around us. addressing issues as varied as food security, fighting hunger, issues as climate finance and just transition, issues related to the reform of the international financial architecture, issues relating to questions of the governance of international banks like the World Bank and the IMF, issues related to trade and investment, focusing on development-oriented things. Thirdly, this is taking place also in a time when there is growing focus on the agency of the developing countries, or what we call the agency of the Global South. That the Global South is beginning to realize that it is better to function in concert and pull together resources, work in solidarity about matters related to changing fundamentally the world that we inherited. Because this is the world, as Wesu calls it, it is the world without us. It is the world of the West and the rest. So it is not the world with us at the center. So it is also happening at a time when the G20 was chaired by about 5 countries of the Global South in close succession. It was Saudi Arabia before Italy, then it was secondly Indonesia, then after Indonesia it was India, last year it was Brazil and South Africa. It's unprecedented for all these countries to preside over the G20 in close succession. It creates a possibility that they might do something more significant, handing over to one another a common agenda rather than each one trying to do something novel like we tend to do. Everybody wants to outshine the other in era of everybody working together in order to cause change. The BRICS are essential to the G20, but they are central to effort to change the world. And Brazil chaired it this year, Russia last year. Some major decisions are being now explored in relation to common currency, to trading in their own currencies, and perhaps some even suggest a BRICS currency at some point. But alternative payment system, not via Visa or not via MasterCard, but an alternative payment system. Of course, India has 2, China has 2 as well, and a few other countries already have these alternative payment systems. So there is something happening there that is very interesting, but there are also limitations that we can see, because talk is not sufficient. Action is much more significant. For example, the BRICS countries, their focus on the external agenda on global change is much more impressive than what they do among themselves. Trade among BRICS countries has not increased significantly, what we call intra-BRICS trade and intra-BRICS investment. And those of you who are keen on doing research might have to understand, why has not been a significant growth in trade and investment between Brazil and South Africa and India, or now Russia and India, or all of these countries together, especially now that there are 10 BRICS countries, together accounting for over 45% of the global population and over 30% of the global GDP. That's huge. But why is that not being circulated with? You get what I'm saying? So when we have such huge economies working together, it should create a possibility for us to source goods from one of the 9, a lot more than we source goods from those outside it. So we need to follow talk with action, because if it doesn't, it will remain a potential, and we'll be talking about a potential for the next 20 years. And nobody eats from a potential. Nobody's changed by a potential. Nobody's transformed by a potential. An African proverb says, however long a log of wood stays under murky waters, it just does not become a crocodile. It remains a suspected crocodile. Now, a potential does not feed us. Potential wealth does not meet the needs. It remains just that. But instead, we'll continue to talk BRICS and feed off the anti-BRICS hand or even an imperial hand at the same time. We speak one, but we feed from another. And that is why it's so significant what South Africa is doing to try and please the United States in order to avoid tariffs and stuff like that, is the fact that you have to choose. If you're going to choose one just cause, be willing to suffer the consequences of it if it is indeed your conviction. You need a courage for your conviction. Again, because an African proverb says, borrowed waters won't quench your thirst. They will fill up your stomach, they will cause you to overflow, but still not quench the thirst. Yeah, that's very significant because that leads us to the fact that Africa is also, this is the fifth point, that Africa's agency has been growing in a very significant way. So this conversation happened in a time where Africa is expected to play a greater role and demonstrate greater will to use its latent power, again, potential power. 55 member states of the United Nations are African. And then there is a further 12 that are African diaspora. That gives you 67 states that could represent a common agenda. But that is potential. Until it is mobilized, it is useless. It's just a number. Until it is utilized, it is useless. It's just a number. Again, potential will not quench our thirst for change. It will not quench our thirst for progress. It won't quench our thirst for an Africa that acts with greater precision, greater direction, greater energy going forward. I'm sure you agree with me that we cannot spend years and years talking about potential. And we have to go into the reality. And we have learned in our 30 years of freedom how potential does not take you there. And over time, it also dissipates. You also lose the potential itself after having lost the chance to use it. Now, African agency is very evident in a number of things. I mean, I know all of you know that the African Union is the latest member of the G20. It joined it last year at thanks to the campaign by India in 2023 that pushed for Africa to be in. Many people don't quite realize it was not others, it was India that pushed Africa to be in. Now the AU is in, and our biggest challenge has been, Keith, the fact that the AU is celebrating being in. And being in is a potential. It is not an achievement. Joining the table is not an achievement because there's always a risk that you become the meal on the table if you don't think about what you are going to do in all of those kind of things. So Africa then becomes this topic of discussion when we're talking about critical minerals. All those precious minerals that we use for cell phones, for drones and all that are found on the African continent. Now Africa has joined a table where its minerals are being discussed. So it becomes a meal very quickly, unless it decides that when it gets to the G20, what its positions are going to be. And that is what we've been pushing for. That's why we've been meeting the AU over this, going to NEPAD and all that. Said, guys, prepare very clear 7 cardinal points and said, this is what we are going to try and push for, so that we get into negotiations with a negotiation table, with a negotiation agenda of some form. And that has been one of the biggest difficulties we have to think about. Fortunately, Africa does have what they call the African Common Position, negotiating position on the reform of international finance, or what they call finance for development. So the adoption of African Common Position is a useful idea because it simply means 55 countries do not each come with their own demands on the table. They have harmonized the demands into a key set of things that are there. If you see the copy of the paper, it is listed right there on page 2, what the critical areas of negotiation are: domestic resource mobilization, financial, which is very important, that we have to depend on the resources that we have so that we can protect the resources we have and use them. So we protect them so that we can use them for something, but project them in order to move ourselves up the ladder. Financial institutional capacity that Africa has to have, ability to finance itself and manage its finances, manage its financial sector, innovative financing mechanisms, very specific things in relation to innovative financing on the continent, debt management, because Africa suffers greatly from an external debt burden. It loses so much on debt that it needs in order to power up its infrastructure, industrial development, agriculture, food security, and so on. And lastly, it is partnership for global reform. That Africa has decided that it wants to push for global reform because key to what it's able to achieve is changing the financial regulations, financial rules, financial systems, financial orientations that affect its ability to do what it wishes to do. You and I know that sometimes the continent is unable to do what it does because the systems in which it operates are inimical. We're not designed to enable it, but we're designed to disenable it as a governor. The sixth is that the continent has now also is now discussing further beyond this common position of 5 critical goals. Now it is also discussing the creation of financial institutions. Africa is at the precipice of really getting to critical decisions about an African financial stability mechanism to ensure that we cushion ourselves from excessive inflation, cushion ourselves from balance of payment issues, cushion ourselves from illicit financial flows and other problems that we face. We need a coherent multi-institutional mechanism. That mechanism will include establishing, finally, African financial institutions, the African Reserve Bank, the African Monetary Fund, the African Credit Rating Agency. Those are absolutely critical for Africa to be able to do that. Again, that question and that issue is a potential. I need to keep reminding it's a potential. If it ever was done, it will make a huge difference. And I use if there. The seventh thing to make is to say that Africa has taken great interest in global discussions about the reform of the international financial architecture, the entire architecture that determines who gets the resources, of what volume, on what terms. And there's great discussion at the G20, but also in the UN around it. Africa has taken a keen interest in it. And therefore, and the eighth point arising out of that, a very specific matter is now being prodded to push that this matter be prioritized by Africa, by the rest of the global south. And that is the matter around the role of multilateral development banks, including regional development banks. Because development banks are not like the normal private sector financial banks that make profit out of poverty. They are meant to make concessional, favorable financial terms possible for those who want to achieve development. They exist to stimulate development. They don't exist merely for profit making. And therefore, these banks are very important. South Africa has one called Southern Africa Development Bank, and we have also the Independent Development Corporation, IDC. Africa is the African Development Bank, which is not fully African. It's just called African, its name, pretty controlled from Washington. So the role of African, so this term African sometimes, it used to mean location. It doesn't mean inspiration. So if I establish something from Australia and place it in Africa, I say African. Not to mean it's of African interest or motivation, but that it is in physically Africa. Yeah. That's very, very important. So the role of multilateral development banks is absolutely critical from where we stand. Absolutely important because they offer a cushion against the vagaries of unfair international finance or financial imperialism across the world. At a time when Africa needs to cushion itself against climate shocks, raise new funding for climate change mitigation and adaptation, when Africa has to raise new finances to cushion itself against global debt, distress, when Africa has to cushion itself against the implications of geopolitical divisions in the world, this return of a Cold War between the East and the West, Russia on the one side and China, and the US and the West on the other side. So Africa needs a proper and sustainable, fair and just financing mechanism to do that. And therefore the talk about the reform and the change of the role of the multilateral development bank and regional development bank is absolutely important for Africa. And they will become a central mechanism for financial reform, and they need to be important. Now, a quick note, these banks have been in vogue for a long period of time. Since the Second World War, they've been around. But they've tended to be skewed in favor of developing Europe when Europe was devastated by the war, and for advantaging the United States. They're not formed to help us. Again, however long a log of wood stays underwater, it does not become a crocodile. It is not the crocodile we want. It is a monster we fear. So they have become a very important financing infrastructure for policy reform, for poverty eradication, for stimulating development, industrial development. Perhaps not that much to us, but to others. But as a type of an institution, they are useful. Now, with Africa now facing 3 to 5 trillion, actually the world facing 3 to 5 trillion financing gap, especially for achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, with Africa facing about $200 billion a year in financing gap for infrastructure, the change role of these entities is going to be very, very important. But note that this is also happening when there is a shift from lending to catalyze private investment through mobilization and all of that, but that shift remains very limited. There's increasing focus on alternative and innovative financing mechanism, but that remains also limited, pretty much rhetoric. When there is also talk of reforming the capital adequacy framework that is used for risk sharing and risk mitigation, but that too remains limited. When there is talk about the common debt framework that would help countries mitigate the implications of global debt burden, especially African countries that suffer immeasurably from debt burden, that too remains limited. As we speak in November, the G20 needs to take decisions about whether they are going to reform their debt framework, because there's been an outcry from African countries that it enables certain countries to exit debt burden, but then throws them into debt again, into a new cycle. So they move from one cycle of debt, celebrate Christmas one day, they are back in debt the following day, like we do in our normal life. Celebrate for one day in order to be back in the trap of spending the following day. Some of the challenges that face these banks include the poor governance reform. The voice and representation remains limited principally to the countries of the global north, especially the World Bank and the IMF, but also other regional bodies. The voice and representation is still not open. There's also over-reliance on private finance, and as you know, private finance is like being dependent on a loan shark, and the because of excessive focus on profiteering, it traps countries in unending debt trap. The MDBs as well, multilateral development banks, and RDBs, the regional development banks, they are also remain constrained by the ratings that are done by rating agencies, which are generally private, but also Western. The Moody's, the Fitch, and the others can constrain others from investing in this risk-averse culture that is out there. The G20 negotiations on this matter, the role of multilateral and regional development bank is constrained by geopolitical divide as it is with everybody. With the East fighting the West, that now Trump has having arisen, and he has no faith in multilateral institutions, including the G20. That is making it even more difficult. There's fragmentation in current discussions that have now gone on for a long time since Germany 2017, the discussion on climate finance, which can unlock a lot of funding, and the flow of funding is there, which has not been unlocked, but it's gridlocked. We have to analyze it. Somebody must sit down and analyze, why is that one deal? Both major disagreement, but somehow it is gridlocked. There's also challenges facing these institutions that relate to the institutional capacity. Let me end by pointing out a few critical issues we need to think about. One is the MDBs and RDBs are harmed by over-reliance on optimistic narratives. There's so much optimistic narrative not now about alternative financing, innovative financing, climate financing. There's a lot more positivity than reality. Again, it's potential. So there is an intention to increase the talk about the potential without talk about translation of the potential to reality. So if I keep coming to your house and I tell you that if you buy a blue car, you will do very well, you will solve all your problems, but I don't release the blue car. Every year we talk about the blue car until we're all now singing about the blue car, but the blue car doesn't arrive. I am increasing your hope without meeting it. But what it does is that hope can keep people pursuing without achieving, because it looks like it's coming tomorrow. And tomorrow is tomorrow, by the way. Tomorrow today is tomorrow, then tomorrow is also tomorrow. Tomorrow is tomorrow. It's always going to be tomorrow. And it's always going to be ahead of us. So this is obscuring very uneven, very slow, very subversive actions that are done by others to limit us from doing. The second one is inadequate attention to governance problems. That unless we increase representation and participation of others in decision-making in these institutions, no amount of talk about reform, about them moving to different direction is going to work. Now I'm going to talk about about a story that people know. And unless you change the taxi driver, the conduct of a minibus taxi will remain the same. Even if you change the sticker on the outside and say safe driving. But if the driver who's unsafe remains driving, he will be unsafely safe driving, or whatever, if that is possible. So we have to change the decision-making and decision-making structure and rules and regulations around decision-making in order to change the behavior of the institution. Thirdly, we need to talk about the balance between risk aversion and mandate delivery. The excessive talk about risks can constrain everybody from moving. There is even a saying in the Bible that says a fool sits in his house saying he won't come out because he will be eaten by lions. So he's going to live in the house permanently thinking outside there are lions. If we all thought there were lions, we would not be here. We won't study because we'll be thinking, if I step out, lions will be there. Risk aversion is to imagine that there would be a threat, even when the threat is not there. until you start to believe there is a threat. Now, credit rating agencies are driving the idea that there is a threat. And there's excessive talk about threat until you see that which you say. It is a reality. Fourth is the challenge of mobilizing private finance. It is an overstated potential that says we can mobilize finance. It's part of the discussion about domestic resource mobilization. It says we can mobilize private finance as well. Pull it together, public partnership and stuff like that. In reality, it just doesn't work like that. For private finance to come in, they need to know how they are going to get a return. So it's not just the good of society and moral argument and stuff. It's about, hey, Baba, how do I get back more than I put in? Not get back what I put in. I want to get much more than I put in. Fifth is the inadequate emphasis on debt distress. There's inadequate recognition and realization that countries are in debt distress, some of them for 20 years, constantly, completely, always in debt, and debt higher than their whole complete GDP. You know, when you are earning 20,000 rand and your debts are 25,000 rand, it means you are not earning. It means you have a potential to earn, but it is not reality. And seventh one is there is a neglect of the absorption capacity of many countries. But you know, it's a reality. For many countries, program director, getting 200 billion funding won't help them. Because they don't have the capacity to use the 200 billion. There are some people, including some of us here, that do not need to get more money than we are getting. Because if we get more, it will kill us. We won't know how to use it. We better not get it until we have the capacity to do it. Because it is the capacity to absorb that money and use it to a particular end that can be a biggest challenge. You can access finance, but if you don't know how to use it optimally, it will actually lead you to greater burden. I'm talking to South Africans here, and I know South Africans know about it. A number of municipalities in South Africa returns billions of money unspent back to national treasury. And these are provinces with big potholes, water shortages, and all of those things. Because if you don't have the right engineers in the right place, you won't be able to do the procurement, you won't be able to do the project management, you won't be able to, so that you are able to claim the money. You don't just claim the money. If I give you 20 rand and I transfer it into your account and you do not know how to use the bank app, that 20 rand is useless to you. It's there, you can go around telling people I have 20, the one you can't withdraw because you do not know how to. So the absorption capacity that comes from the corrosion of state capacity, the loss of our ability to do the things that we do, it's a real problem. The last one is the need for stronger evidence. We need for more research. We need for more data. One of the tragedies, especially on the African continent, and I know political economists have been talking about it for a long time, is that Africa data does not belong to Africa. Africa data does not belong to Africa. The data you use to estimate the GDP in many African countries is borrowed from the World Bank. But here's the catch. The World Bank does not have the data that it borrows to Africa. Sounds like witchcraft, isn't it? The World Bank gives Africa the data it uses to calculate GDP. But the World Bank that is giving does not have what it gives. What do I mean? It gives data, but that data is not real data. The World Bank holds on Africa what you call guesstimates, not even estimates, not data, guesses about how many people are in Mali, about how many industries and what are the levels of production. It's simply a guess. You sit there and think, I think it's 23,000. The other one said, no, maybe 21. Okay, let's go with the 21. What is the basis? No scientific basis. That is one. The second thing is that when there is data, data was collected through a census managed from outside a country. You get someone come, pay for the census, it's expensive, and then because they pay for the census, you sign an agreement that they will keep the data. Now you go on the internet, you buy the data about the child mortality in Kenya. You buy it from a private company. You have to pay a lot. So that lack of access to data means we are looking for a black cat in the dark. We have no means to finally nip it in the bud and be very specific about what we are looking at. Now, in closing, all of these demands that we prioritize voice and governance, we leverage the reforms on institutions, that we integrate new risk determination, you streamline and scale the common framework on debt, you strengthen technical assistance, you strengthen capacities on the African continent, and get the state functioning optimally. The kind of things we've been talking about in Pan-Africanism, that you need stronger states, more capable countries, but more than anything, you need an Africa that knows itself and is confident on itself for it to grow. Because if it doesn't, it will continue to be fed by others. And again, borrowed waters won't quench your thirst. Keith, thank you very much for reminding us that we need to have a conversation about meaningful change that Africa needs. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Zondi, for those very important thoughts, very much relevant, the things that we study and the things that we teach. So I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. So what we're going to do before we go to the question and answer session, we would need Professor Keith, to say something in response to your thoughts. So we're going to give Professor Keith to respond. Thank you very much.
Professor Zondi, thanks for a lecture which was comprehensive and splendid. I'm not a specialist on the multilateral banks, but I've just jotted down a few thoughts. The first is that currently Egypt, over half the annual budget goes to paying back debt. So that's a warning to other countries not to mismanage their budget and not to fall into what amounts to a debt trap. The second thought I had is if you look at, for example, the negotiations on climate change, the global north pays lip service to a just economic transition in the global south, but the capital, the concessional capital they've put up for this is not even 1/10 of what they pledged. So one must be very realistic in planning ahead. Now, if you look at the current architecture of the African multilateral banks, we have the foremost, the African Development Bank, founded in 1964, based in Abidjan, the Africa Export-Import Bank, founded in 1969, headquartered in Cairo, and then we have a number of sub-regional banks. For example, there's the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, the Sasensad Bank, headquartered in Jamina, the Kamesa PTA Bank, with its headquarters in Bujumbura, and the Kamesa Infrastructure Fund. We have the Development Bank of Southern Africa, with its head office in Midrand, the East African Bank, based in Kampala, and the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development based in Lomé. Now, I would wonder if there's not a possibility of an amalgamation of all these banks to form a continental bank, which would exercise a huge depth in capital they cannot do individually over there. If we look at the African Union Constitutive Act, we see there it proposes founding an African monetary fund, which has not yet been set up. It clearly, judging by its name, is to follow the International Monetary Fund and to focus on short-term financial crises that a country might face with the loans tied to that purpose. The Constitutive Act also advocates an African central bank. A central bank typically deals with setting the interest rates for a currency, but there's not yet a continental currency. One was proposed to be called an Afro, but so far all attempts to amalgamate even the sub-regional currencies have floundered. We do have an association of African central banks based in Dakar, which may be the way to go forward. And with the failure to set up an amalgamated currency, we have seen the Pan-African payment and settlement system, which enables countries to transact business between them without going through the US dollars for that over there. Then the Constitutive Act proposes an African Investment Bank. This would seem to be a duplicate for the African Development Bank. And banks are very expensive creatures, so one doesn't want to duplicate their work, and it should, I imagine, be renamed as an African Development Bank. Well, thank you for those really good thoughts that you shared with us, and we look forward to the question and answer session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Keith. Okay, so we have first round, 4 questions. I have one hand, second, 3, 4. Okay, so, yes, yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. Director. Prof. Zondi, thank you so much for your address. It was wonderful. I appreciate it. So my first question, I have 2 questions actually, or 3 if you will. So my first question is with can we afford to let go of this using the Bretton Woods institutions, right? Can we afford? Because it seems like our survival has been embedded, in using these institutions, that it will be so difficult for us to, detach from using these institutions. So if not, do we have like a better chance, of reforming such institutions to better serve the specific needs of Africa, right? Or creating institutions of our own like you suggested? So that's my first question. And then my second question actually also built up on the first question of, can we create such institutions? Because African Union is an intergovernmental organization. It's not a supranational organization like the EU. So whatever framework that they come with is unbinding, useless. Look at the the security clusters. They create such institutions or frameworks, and it's optional. Like, okay, I'll make a trade deal, I'll take the trade deal or whatever. I mean, look at the war between, or not war, but the conflict between Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia with regards to the Renaissance Dam. There were no binding legal framework to stop this conflict. If African Union had a binding legal framework for transbording water or courses, this conflict would have ended a long time ago. But because we don't have a legal binding framework to stop such things, we can't actually think of saying, okay, let's create our own, financial institution, because it's optional. Like, countries are going to say, you know what, I don't want to be part of this, because we think of our own stomachs. So I think there's a challenge there of saying that we need to think of creating our own financial institution, because we are a intergovernmental institution, not a supranational institution. So I'm a big advocate of let's turn or reform African Union into a supranational organization. I mean, the EU is making it, has been doing it, is working. If we can just become a supranational organization, and the decision that we make is binding. Whether you like it or not, you are going to adhere to it. But right now, it's just optional. Okay, I'll agree to it. And then my last
All
question.
right, sir, sorry, let's give her.
Yeah,
Let's
my
give
last
her.
question.
No,
Can
no,
I-
let's give her.
Okay, thank you.
Let's allow others. We'll come back, ne? We'll come back, sir. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, actually, Prof. Zondi and Prof. Gottschalk. That was very, very, very beautiful. My first question is, why are we as Africa, all countries, obsessed with being on that table that we all know that it does not benefit us? Outside any other thing that we can ever discuss is the fact that even if they leave, we're still going to be there. We're not necessarily going to be the slaves, but then they will have to pack up and leave as well and go back to their mother countries, right? So we'll be there. If we rot, we rot. It does not, it's not going to be anything better. So the first question is, why are we actually obsessed? And then with state, when we come back to the question of state capacity, how are we to build state capacity for all these countries, moving forward, looking at mines have been owned by all of these people, and the government is afraid of actually taking them away. The land, we're afraid of taking back our land. I'm talking about the whole entire Africa. And obviously, our father Trump will actually bomb us, though we have the UN as he can actually do anything. We saw that in the last few weeks. So the UN, we need to come back to, is international law really law to Africa, or it's there to control Africans? Because we want to abide by rules that were put by people that don't even abide by them. What obsession is this? And then my last question.
Sorry.
Okay.
Two. Pass the building down there.
Yeah, no, I've learned that the chair is very harsh with these things. Thanks so much, Prof, for your talk. So just to say that the program of analogies that you use, I think it's a very useful tool, because I understand it quite clear. One, I just want, you might have answered this before, because I walked in right as you were speaking about BRICS, and you used this word that I think is very generative, this idea of potential. And I want to ask actually something, on the other side of potential, whether you think that there is a potential that there might be risks of a second kind of imperialist relationship happening within those BRICS countries, or another superpower trying to emerge within itself and using, this kind of alternative, block that is BRICS. And you said it's merged now to 10 countries. Other countries are interested as well. So do you think there's any potential that we might be seeing another, a person looking at the wobbling power of the US and trying to use that use the BRICS as a vehicle for that? And then the second one is around this question around location versus inspiration or motivation. All right, that things do not necessarily come from Africa just by being named African. And I want to, sort of take that a bit further to ask, you know, what does it even mean to be African now in the context of how capital and conquest have imposed itself on whatever we call African identity now, has really been quite, you know, quite implicated in what is Western, in what is, you know, these dominant ways of knowing, being, and doing, as the decolonials will say. So what would it mean to have things that are of African inspiration and African motivation? Thank you.
Sure, you can pass it there at the back. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thanks, Prof. Sondi. So I've got, you know, it was a very good talk, and I've learned a lot. I have a comment and a question. So the comment first is on the capacity within, you know, Africa and South Africa to develop our own frameworks, you know, so that we don't get, you know, these non-scientific frameworks from, you know, Europe and so on, and you use them. And what we've done in the industry, in the forest industry, is we get biomass conversion factors from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they gave us equations to calculate our carbon emissions, and that was 3 years ago. And we used them for a year and 5 months, and then we developed our own, so that's tier 1. And we realized that we've been paying tax of about 3.5 million rands, more than what we're supposed to pay, because the equations that they gave us were overestimating our emissions. But now we've got our own tier 1 carbon equations and biomass conversion factors, so we can actually pay the right tax. So I think a point from that is that we need to develop our own capacity so that we can be able to, you know, use our own data and also give those people that, because we are mandated to report based on the climate change bill, so we can actually report the emissions, but we're reporting the right ones. So that's just a comment on capacity development. And then my question is around mobilizing climate finance. So, you know, ahead of COP30, you know, we're going to Belém in November. There's going to be a lot of discussions around how do we attract, you know, private investment to pay for adaptation and mitigation finance. And I heard you speaking about the private sector and, you know, attracting the investment, because philanthropy cannot do it alone. How do you think we can distance, in a way, and I'm using this word very loosely here, distance ourselves from, you know, the European standards of attracting private finance, and actually develop our own capacity internally as Africa with, you know, private finance, philanthropic finance, and also, you know, finance from the government as well. Also develop, you know, not relying on multilateral development banks to actually do the work alone. How can we leverage that mobilization, you know, regionally? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for those questions. Okay, so we will have another round. For those who still have burning questions, right, from those who asked from the first round of questions, we can give you. But we just want to get as more diverse as we can. And Prof. Zondi has asked that you also say something on these questions. You know, you don't have to attend to all of them, but he must attend to all of them. But you can just say anything you want to say after he has answered. You can go, Prof.
Let me keep your note of that. Yeah, thank you very much. The thing about it is that these are profound questions. Many of them are research questions. Some of them are PhD questions. I mean, I'm thinking about this. It's studies. It's things we should study and stuff. And I'm going to treat that these questions are inputs, a challenge, a contribution to the conversation. So I'm not going to be answering in the sense of the word, and pick up but a few things. You know, the one about the basis on which we make decisions. It reminds me of this conversation we've been talking right now, and we say it all the time. We say there's a lack of political will. The lack of political will and the lack of political will. We hardly ever define for ourselves what we mean by political will. It is the will to do what? By who? Because sometimes you can wish for a radical decision from a non-radical person, which means the problem is yours. because you looked for a bone in a banana. You looked for a radical position from a conservative person. The kind of leadership that we've allowed to rise up on the African continent aren't always a fit for what we wish for the continent. And that is why we often say, fix African citizenship, then we can fix African leadership and state. We make the leaders we have, but we are unhappy with the leaders we made. And we think it's not us who made them. We are very confused people. We participate in the making of a society that we see, but we are unhappy with it. You know, South Africa once elected a person who was facing court cases and protested against him later. It's just, you have to think about it. That's what South Africans did. And they keep electing Museveni like 7 times and stuff like that. And after elections, they are unhappy. So we too need to understand, and I often say, the best way to understand it is to have grown up in a rural area. Because in a rural area, there are certain things that we ascribe to witchcraft, which is a thing that just does not make sense by logic. If it doesn't make sense by logic, we say they were bewitched. So South Africans and Africans are bewitched in this sense, that we make choices that are inimical to our interests. We elect people who are less capable than us, and we hope to have a state capable, more capable than us. Someone told a story of a South African who was on a plane somewhere. Of course, it's a story. They say there was a US citizen, a Russian citizen during the Cold War, and a South African citizen. Apparently, the US citizen is the one who said we're the first ones in space. And the Russian responded they were the first ones in the moon. The South African responded that they would be the first ones in the sun. So they spoke into the future. And then when somebody said it would be too hot, they said they would go at night. So it's a thing about us packing so much on wish and hope. We're people of great hope. But sometimes that hope causes us not to take the decisions that are realistic, are real, and are painful in order to cause change. It is when the citizens of Africa change that Africa will change. There is no other way I can think of it as an African. It's when the citizens of South Africa change that South Africa will change. It's when the citizens of Africa change, including change what they think about themselves, change how well or bad they regard themselves, how much they love their country, how much they love their future, then they will change the decisions they take. Because some say they love their future, but their actions say they don't love their future by the decisions that we make. So that also speaks to the question of state capacity. Which state are we talking about? Is it the state of the political class, or is it the state of the citizens? Because in the original form of politics, if you look at indigenous African politics too, and all of that, the sovereigns are human beings. The sovereigns are citizens. They cede the power to a small group of members of the political class to govern on their behalf for 5 years. And these so-called powerful people also all themselves understand, which is why when their mandate runs out, they now need to get a new mandate. They even go into a slum. They go into a dungeon to take a picture with a child full of mucus and stuff like that, just in order to get the vote. They know where the power comes from. The problem is the one who has the power doesn't know the power comes from them. So they behave like employees when they are the employer. That's a problem that we have. Even people who are here, university, very well educated people, because unfortunately, the colonial form of education teaches me how to be a thing, not how to be a human being. So I learn in order to become a chemist. But I'm already bigger than a chemist because I'm a human being. So it doesn't equip me with the abilities to be a better human being. I could give you the ability to be a better employee in a job. That is why I'm confronted, you and I are confronted with many questions throughout our education system up to PhD. But there's nowhere in any of those levels from grade 0 to PhD where we are discussing who I am and what is the significance of a human being. What is the significance of a citizen for a change of society? If I do not know myself, how am I going to know how I'm going to be ruled, and where I'm going to go? It's a very deep thing. It's witchcraft, I promise you. Yes, of course, it addresses all the other questions. Let me just end with this. Julius Nyerere once got frustrated because he had spoken to the president of Uganda at the time, Milton Obote, and president of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, and argued that they needed to abandon their countries, the three of them, including himself, so that they can create a region. So at the time of the day, let's abandon your 3 million population, your 6 million population, your 5 million population, to make possible a 15 million body called East Africa. Then they refused because they thought that if they lose the flag, lose the national anthem, and lose blue lights, then it's an end for them. Then he summarized, 1974, that the biggest challenge facing Africa is not imperialism from outside. You've just completed the statement.
Question is rather short. Since the topic is on multilateral development banks, I think I just wanted to understand a bit more about the new development bank, which is termed or known as the BRICS Bank. Just tell us maybe the importance of this bank, why it's important for BRICS as well as the global south and development countries, and how it's important for South Africa. I think I read last week that South Africa took another loan from the bank, about 7 billion rand loan. So I just want to understand more about the bank and its importance for development in the global south. Thank you.
Okay. Another question? There, the corner. Can you just pass the mic, please?
So I would like to ask my question. I think it was the 5th point or the 6th point to Prof. Sondi's points when he was presenting. So on the context of the pursuit for global change. So I would like to understand critically that to what extent will the African countries be able to push for global change, considering the fact that the West has the partly control of the global economy, and also like on the basis of the capacity of South Africa, basically on itself. So does it actually able to pay back the $750 million, which was of course converted to 13.5 billion Just to clarify, just to critically analyze the extent of the country's ability. So those are my questions for now. Thank you so much.
Sorry? Okay. Can you just repeat the last question?
The question was on the basis of the capacity. Yes, the economic capacity of South Africa itself. So can it be able to actually pay back the money which to the World Bank, which was $750 million that was converted to $13.5 billion from 2020 right up to now in the COVID-19 pandemic. So I would like to analyze, to critically understand that. Thank you so much.
All right. Can you please pass the mic? Prof. Pretorius here.
Prof. Zondi, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your talk, especially when you spoke about knowledge. And the students are going to hate me now, but what is your take on AI, especially what the students have at their fingertips at the moment? Because you're also here today as an academic from a different university, and we'd like to hear what your insights, if you have a conversation going there, community of practice, we'd like to learn from you today. Thanks.
All right. Lukola, do you have your question? No? Okay. All right, so let's go back to the first two guys who had burning questions. We'll give the lady and then we'll give Curtis. That's it. And then we'll be done. Sorry, Prof. You can just pass the mic. These guys are burning.
It's not off. Actually, with AI, very interestingly, but then as students, we use AI because we don't relate to the work in the education system that we actually have. The question should be, why do students actually use AI? Then, just something, eh? But then it goes back to as I go back, it's to Africa as a whole. Should the leaders maybe be changing their approach? Be diplomatic to the discussions and the negotiations, give diplomatic answers, and then come back while you are actually trying to looking at the economics of internally than externally. Because I think a lot of leaders are focusing on how a country is performing on the market outside than actually looking at how many people within that country are poor. Because every day we want to talk about how bad of a market we are externally. How about we internalize us performing bad on the external market, but our people enjoying the privileges that they actually deserve as human beings. And then secondly, a lot of people like hate me whenever I say this, but then we have to, you spoke of knowledge and how we inherited it, right? But then how do we create a knowledge for the people that actually relates to them in ways that they know? From my grandmother, who will not be able to read this document right now because of the way it is, or articles as they are. The ways of knowledge have been imposed on us. How are we to create our own while the media's houses and publishing houses are actually only on that side? Because you look at Ethiopia, they don't have that, maybe like the IMF as affecting them so much, or the media house affecting them so much, but then instead of building their own capacity, or even other African leaders helping them build capacity, or different media houses, or a different bank, actually, and then now we join Ethiopia instead, and then in that way, nobody has to go to war, in a way. Just something to spike.
Thank you, Curtis.
I'll try to keep it short. So yeah, I want to go back to your part on knowledge. So I appreciate it. I took it as, knowledge diplomacy, So I want to go more into the traditional sense now of science diplomacy and whether it has a part in Africa, So, the big part of, why COVID-19, was, impacted Africa so much was lack of data, or lack of international cooperation and coordination between African countries. And I think it's because we lacked science diplomacy, using our own scientific-based policies to inform diplomatic actions between countries, like sharing data. So do you feel like, my question then relates to, does it have a place in Africa, science diplomacy? And then how far behind are we, or are we falling behind? And what can we do? Thank you.
Oh, you have a question? I will give you, because it's you and her, right? That's it. Then we're done. Just those two ladies, and then we're done. Yes, yeah. She'll be the last.
Thank you so much to Professor Zondi and Mr. Gottschalk. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. It's not a question, or, okay, let me just say it's a hypothetical question or comment based on what he said and what she said. He is talking about COVID-19 making it, like, how difficult it was for us to, like, counteract COVID-19 based on the stats that we were getting that were not really of our own people and research, right? So my question is, if African countries were to become one, how would that, I feel like that would help eliminate a lot of problems that individual African countries have on their economies, their research, the healthcare, poverty, all of these things. I don't know if it's a question or it's a comment, like, but I just wanted to let that out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. My question actually is mostly the comment that was actually mentioned and highlighted by Prof. Zondi, which is about potential. And my thing is, in such discussions, such as the other one we attended was the roadshow, and my thing is we have all of these discussions of this is what we need to do. We all here collaborating and giving inputs of these are the ideas, this is maybe the solution that we need to do. But how does these small conversations that we're having in these spaces become something that is contributed, for example, in the BRICS conversations or the summits and all of that stuff that actually facilitate change? Because these ideas, yes, are important, but how do we get to the implementation process? What are the steps of not having it like as an academic paper that you're publishing, but it's actually something that African countries do implement? Because I feel as though as Africans or in like these spaces or in these discussions, it's just we're having that discussion, we leave these spaces, but then afterwards there's nothing, it doesn't change, it doesn't lead to reaching government spaces or spaces that actually facilitate change. So I think my question is more so on the basis of the potential. How do we then move away from the potential that we have in these discussions of solutions and problem solving to actually being more practical about facilitating these reform solutions that we have? So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Prof. Keith, do you have anything? No? Okay, so I'll give you Prof.
So, Program Director, you are not helping me. You are not answering any question yourself. So I must answer all the questions alone. And these people are asking the most difficult questions, which is what usually happens before lunch. Before lunch, they ask the most complex questions. But these are not questions again. These are conversations, and the conversation we must all have. The conversation about Africa being an African Union being an intergovernmental organization is an old conversation. We've been warned now, going back to the 1980s, that intergovernmental organization won't help us. Because it simply means country A, country B, country C, country come together like in this meeting. They retain their individual identity, but their individual decision making. So we come here and discuss and agree one decision, but you retain a right to exercise your own decision. So what's the point of spending 6 months convincing each other if you still are not going to be bound by the collective decision? What were we trying to do? We were trying to do integration, which requires us to lose national sovereignty without losing national sovereignty. You get what I'm saying? The mixing of ingredients requires ingredients to adapt to one another to create something new. But if the mixing is based on the fact that each retains their nature, then the mixing is not mixing, it's simply cohabitation. It's simply placing them close to one another, and that's what I say. Intergovernmentalism is never supposed to be a permanent state, it's supposed to be a route to that. To allow countries to cooperate, to take decisions together, but they must upgrade from there to what is called supranationalism, which is to allow the consensus to be implemented. Right now, the AU decides, but it doesn't implement. Because it says in itself, individual countries will, out of goodwill, the goodness of the heart, implement the decisions of the heart. Where does goodness of the heart ever work? In which sector of life? I know none. But what we expect the states to have to act morally, out of moral obligation, and take tough decisions to implement collective good. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Unless they are forced, unless you present to them good incentives and disincentives, states don't just behave. The EU is where it is because you increase the incentives when they behave in line with a collective decision, and you increase the penalties when they deviate. So when they deviate, it's not out of moral uprightness. It's out of strategic calculation that it costs me more to deviate than to align. You get what I'm saying? It's just normal. It's all of that. You know, the people of Africa, part of the challenge is that they are not part of the calculation about what we are trying to do. Africa spent about 4 years discussing what was called Africa We Want, that culminated in the Agenda 2063, which is the most laudable plan for a 50-year African journey. Beautiful, absolutely. But it was done without African people. So this we represented not the we Africans, we, a few, that were part of the problem we are solving. They are now leading the solution of the problem. You get what I'm saying? Again, it's got to do with this African optimism that everything will go at night, will go in the sun, will go at night. So the same group of people that have broken things are now leading the process of fixing the broken things. And the same people are still broken, and they're going to lead the fixing of what they broke. It's a serious anomaly, but it's a function of what we've done. Somebody said a very great point. People ask this all the time, integration. When you bring 50 broken things, do you produce an unbroken thing? Or are you increasing the proximity of broken things? They will collectively produce a broken thing. Are we a sum total of our individual capacity? It's a difficult question because of the route we have taken on the African continent out of Pan-Africanism. We say everybody is a member of the AU before they decide to be a member of AU. You get what I'm saying? Before they express their will to be in, they are automatically in. Now, you and I know, anything you don't qualify for, you don't adapt to. You get what I'm saying? Because there's no process of qualifying that says, if you do this, do that, do that, do this, then you can become a member. If I don't have that process of qualifying, which means I have nothing to do with it, then I may not actually do anything. I may not actually work for the thing I didn't qualify for. You get what I'm saying? It's a serious thing. It's almost like saying, join university on the basis that you have an LLB beforehand. Tell me which student is going to study. That one, we will call them bewitched. Why study when we've already got a degree? So it doesn't quite happen. So in African state, unlike in other processes where there is 3 founding states, then they say, if you meet these conditions, you strengthen democracy at home, you strengthen leadership at home, you include youth, you include women, you improve your outcomes in terms of audit outcomes across the board in number of people who access water, number of people who access funding, the number of people who are upgraded out of poverty into jobs, the number of jobs we make. If you get to 70% job employment rate, then you can join in. Then states work in order to join in and thereby improve their individual competency. Again, we're saying it. States that do well don't always do well because they're just morally good people. They are incentivized, they are trying to chase an incentive. They too, if we remove the incentive, they would be like Museveni too. It's not automatic, it's about what incentivizes correct behavior and all of that. Now, how do we produce our own knowledge? Hey, that's one of the things we do. Part of the challenge we have is that own knowledge is not actually own knowledge. Some of it is owned knowledge. You owned someone else's knowledge. Such as this thing that I am Zulu, you know? This thing that you are Xhosa, that thing that you are Pedi, that thing that you are Venda. It sounds indigenous, but it's nothing indigenous about it. Nothing indigenous about these tribal labels. Nothing, nothing. There isn't a Zulu. There isn't a Xhosa. There isn't a Pedi. There isn't a Venda outside colonial creation. All of them are established, these labels and identities, in the 19th century. But Jan van Riebeeck has already been here over 150 years. Now you tell pre-colonial? It can't be pre-colonial after colonial. It can't be pre-post. It's just completely impossible. Now, the Zulu one, you would talk about all of the others also the same. I'm just illustrating with that one specific thing where we think about own knowledge. It's all of it, actually. The Europeans are looking for a Germanic society everywhere they are going. And a Germanic society has tribes, bigger than a clan. Tribes that form nation, that becomes a country. When they don't find it, they create it. They found, oh, so what's your tribe? Hey, tribe. What is tribe? We don't have. Then we'll create one for you. Then you will kill for it. Kill for something that was never yours. Somebody busy trying to be proudly Xhosa. It's a tragedy. Né? How can you be proudly what is invented for your division, which does not actually exist? How you get it, look at the writings of Africans that are writing in the early 19th century. They don't use any of these labels. Look at it easily, the newspaper. One of the earliest newspapers, there are two. One was Langa, the other one is Isikitimi. Isikitimi becomes Isikitimi Sabantu. until about the 1880s where it became Isigidim Samaxhosa. Then I'm asking, when did you move from being Abantu to being Amaxhosa? Who benefits from you moving from being human beings to being Amaxhosa? Human beings are people, Amaxhosa are things. Who benefit from you moving from being to non-being? Get what I'm saying? The earliest book is written in Zulu, in the south of Durban. It's called Abantu Nalapho Bavela Khona. The people and whence they came. When did these people start to believe, Bona, they are Amazulu now? When they used to be Abantu, people. You get what I'm saying? So, why am I making a story long, short story long now? The point is, that thing about own knowledge, it may also be about owned knowledge, which is acquired knowledge. You owned what was not yours. You owned it so much that you're hitting your chest over it. Yeah, I can kill for a thing that one is not. It's witchcraft. It only bewitched people would hang on a stolen identity, a forced identity, an imposed identity so much that they're willing to kill for it. It's a strange thing. And this identity prevents them from becoming South African because they're busy being Xhosa or being Zulu or being Venda. And their being South African requires them to die in this identity. We can go into other identity, colored identity. What identity is that? These are people. They're not colored. My 3-year-old, and was very small, and saying, Daddy, why do we brown people call peach people white? And why do peach people call brown people black? So he was trying to make sense of nonsense. But this is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. It can only happen by it being drilled in your mind until you realize. And I remembered my uncle. My uncle failed school because he failed to assimilate. My uncle exited in what was called Standard 2 at a point, and Standard 2 is around grade. What is Standard 2? Grade what? Grade 4 now. Yeah, he exited around grade 4 because a teacher wrote a figure that looks like this on a board. A figure that looks like this on a board, and asked what it is, and everybody, he was the most confident one because he had been a shepherd before. He had been a shepherd before going to school, so he had acquired knowledge in the field. Now he confidently answers and said, that's a dog kennel. That's definitely a dog kennel. And then the teacher laughs at him like you were laughing. And they laughed, everybody laughed at him, and it caused the other kids to laugh at him as well. Look, stupid answer. This is an A. It's a capital A. Then they all laugh at that. He's also bewildered. He's waiting for someone to explain what is an A. What lives in an A? Where do you find it? Where do you buy it? What does it do? Does it walk? Does it think? Because it comes from a world where everything must have a meaning. Then the teacher is going to tell everybody, this is an A. They say after me, A, A, again, A, A. In the end, they will all get to know it's an A, but they cannot prove it's an A. And they cannot tell what lives in an A. And what, after all, is an A? How do I throw it? Where do I find it? Where do I meet it? If I get money to go find it. So you get a rote learning which it forces on you to believe a particular thing, even if it doesn't make sense to you. And then you call it indigenous knowledge. Some of that knowledge is not indigenous. So I think what we need to do right now is to unlearn the things that were imposed on us, including those that look very our own. They are not our own. We need to relearn on the basis of where we are today and learn things that we need in order to progress. Not look into some past that was dead, that's no longer in there. And we've learned that one of the best ways to know is to analyze properly why we are where we are, and then provide answers to how we can break out of that cycle so that we can build a better society going into the future. Practical and pragmatic things about how do we break the logjam of high poverty, high inequality, underdevelopment. Practically, what are the things we can do? That will then become our knowledge, because it will be answers to the questions we ourselves posed, rather than this thing called international best practice, which is to borrow someone's idea because it worked for them. Sometimes, even if it did not work for them, they simply imagined that it can work for you. And then you adopt it, spend money on it, and it takes you nowhere. And it's international also. Usually it doesn't mean an African country. It doesn't mean a Latin American country. It doesn't mean an Asian country. It's always going to mean a European country. So international is a hidden word for Western. Yeah, so we've said a mouthful. I'm very sorry about it. But the last point I want to refer to, science diplomacy. Yeah, that's a very important one. It also depends on which science. I want to come to the one about implementation. In this country, our leaders are very bold. Our leaders are very, very bold. They tell us that our biggest problem is an implementation problem. And they tell us all the time that it's an implementation problem. But they don't tell us how do we break out of it. That we have great plans. Africa has one of the best plans, but the realities are not following the plan. The question is, what is the connection between that? We don't quite realize that the people speaking are the problem. Because they've also heard from a consultant that our problem is an implementation problem. They come and repeat to you that it's an implementation problem. If you ask them how, they cannot say how. Because they are in a position that requires them to cause change and lead change. But they have no sense of what change they need to lead. They can read speeches written by others for you, but they cannot read a society they want to see change. Which means in the end, it's us who are a problem. It's us who put them in power, knowing that they have no record of personal success. If somebody has not upgraded his house from a slum to a mansion, how do I expect them to upgrade a Department of Water Affairs into something that works? If somebody has no personal success, how is he going to have public success? It's us who are looking for a bone in a banana. It just does not work. So we need to change it. Part of it is that when we grow, and Frans Fanon prays about this, when we grow, we will stop taking decisions on emotional basis. On the basis that this one comes from speaks my language. I don't even know if it's my language. And it comes from my people. He sings like me. He rises like me. Because we will then take people we feel good about into positions of power where feeling is not necessary. I should get to a point where I dislike her. I just dislike her mannerism, dislike her talk, I dislike her dancing, but I realize I need her in the Department of Housing. I still vote for her, though I don't like her. Because it's got nothing to do with because we too do it, isn't it? When we have a plumber issue at home, do you look for a plumber you like? No. If we did, we would be having big plumbing issues today. You look for a plumber you don't even know, but who is proficient in it. But when you do look for a people to plumb a country, you look for a person who is useless, but who sings well. Which means you and I are selfish. We do it to a country what we will never do for our own personal circumstances. The problem is us, citizens. May God heal us from our witchcraft.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Prof. Zondi. And I think that out of your lecture and the question and answer session, what we can derive is that indeed political thought is a living tradition, because what you have done now is that you have given philosophical answers through a dialogue and a conversation to what might appear to be a study of numbers, statistics. You have given us a philosophical ground and historical, cultural grounds to think about it in very, very beautiful ways. So I'm going to call on Professor Cheryl, who is the chairman of our department, to do a vote of thanks as we finish.
Thank you so much. So this conversation is indeed part of a larger conversation. And Prof. Zondi can and has pointed the finger back at all of us. Yeah. And asked us, how can we take the discussion, the potential for change, and change itself further? Because what came through very clearly was the interactive role between citizens, leaders, and institutions. And the pressure points, the pressure dynamics, and the incentives that we can influence. So I need to do the vote of thanks. And just to say that the award means so much to us as a political studies department. It recognizes the work of Prof. Gottschalk, but it's also enhanced the capacity of the department and lifted our scholarship and the engagement, etc., in the area especially of international relations, regional governance, foreign policy, security, and so much more. There's a lot of stakeholders to be thanked. Forgive me if I leave anyone out. So first, the technical people, UWC's institutional advancement team, in particularly Madadi Williams, who's always here for us. Thank her. The behind-the-scenes people would be technical staff, ICS staff, AVA staff, assets team, security, risk and compliance, cleaning service, venue management, and then in the absence, Prof. Khala, our DVC that did the opening, Prof. Iso, that welcomed us from a faculty perspective, and Ayanda Nombila for being an excellent program director and very strict there with the questions. We thank you for that. And then a great thank you to our keynote speaker, that was fantastic, Prof. Sipamandla Zondi. And we are so grateful to you. And as I say, it's part of a broader discussion. And as you know, the event's been live streamed. And so since it's been live streamed, that engagement will also continue as well. And then very importantly, to thank Keith Gottschalk, both for his reflections, but also, Keith, your contribution to our department, Political Studies Department, to UWC as an institution, as Prof. Zondi said, to South Africa, and more broadly. We value you and we thank you. And then in her absence, Diana Yach and the Marburger Foundation for establishing this award. And we are very grateful to the foundation and to Ms. Yach and to her brother as well. And then finally, I want to thank the audience and the online audience. And I'm amazed actually, because normally at lunch, the food is there, but the conversation was carrying on. So it was really a lively and engaging discussion. So I want to thank you for making it a very vibrant event, and conclude the event and invite you for some refreshments. But thank you very much. This concludes the event.